Supergirl opens domestically this Friday in just 2 days, and as I'm recording this, the global rollout is already beginning overseas. So now the marketing stops, the posters stop, the James Gunn has a planned interview stop. Unfortunately, the Millie Alcock interview stopped too. And the receipts begin because the tracking is already awkward. Box Office Pro has Supergirl projected around the mid-40s to mid-50s for opening weekend. Another wildly circulated tracking number has it sitting around $51 million domestically. That's smack dab between mid-40s and mid-50s. Anyway, online downside scenarios have pushed the conversation even lower, with some weekend chatter dipping into the high 30s. And while Supergirl is trying to prove the DCU has momentum, Toy Story 5 just opened to $160 million domestic. So Kara might not just be fighting space villains this weekend. She might be fighting Pixar's second weekend. Superman opened to $125 million domestic last summer. Warner Brothers treated that like proof the DCU was fixed. Well, at least I didn't. Because one Superman opening does not erase years of DC trust damage. Now, Supergirl is about to answer the real question. Did that Superman audience actually follow the DCU? Or did they just rent it for one weekend? Let's look at the receipts. Hey everyone, Chris here, the Critical Nerd, and thank you to all the returning viewers that are taking the time out here today to check out my videos. And if you're new here, welcome in, stick around. Because around here, we keep expectations low and receipts high, and we try very hard not to let studio marketing departments do our thinking for us. And this week, that matters. Because Supergirl is not just another superhero movie opening in the summer corridor. This is the second mainline theatrical film in James Gunn and Peter Safran's new DCU. That means this is not Blue Beetle. This is not Shazam 2, Fury of the Gods. This is not a late-night DCEU leftover Warner Brothers quietly released like it was sneaking a body out of a hotel lobby at 3 in the morning. This is the new era, the clean slate, the we have a plan now era. And the first theatrical movie in that plan, Superman, opened to $125 million domestically last year. It gave Warner Brothers a headline. It gave DC Studios a win. It gave James Gunn defenders a number they could screenshot and carry into every argument like it was the Ten Commandments. But there's a difference between people showing up once for Superman and people buying into the DCU as a universe. Superman proved that Superman still matters. That's not nothing. But curiosity is not the same thing as trust. Curiosity says, let me see what they do with Superman. Trust says, I'm showing up for the next movie because I believe this universe is worth following. And that is the test this weekend. Supergirl is not asking, will people show up for Superman? It's asking, did the audience care enough to follow the universe to the next movie? And if the answer is somewhere around 45 to 55 million, that's not a victory lap. That's a warning light. So let's start with the number. Box Office Pro's long-range forecast has Supergirl opening between 45 and 55 million domestic. Gabe's Radar, summarizing tracking attributed to National Research Group and reporting from Puck's Matthew Maloney, says the number came down to about 51 million domestic. Now that matters for two reasons. First, that would put Supergirl right in the neighborhood of The Flash, which opened to around 55 million back in 2023. Second, it would be less than half of Superman's 125 million domestic opening. Now, tracking is not destiny. I've said that before. Tracking can move. Walk-ups can happen. Reviews can help. A movie can open soft and leg out if audiences actually like it, which it's all true. But tracking is still a receipt. It is an industry temperature check. And right now, the temperature check is not saying Supergirl is about to break out. It is saying Supergirl is trying not to underwhelm. And that is the problem. Because if this were some random disconnected superhero release, fine. Different conversation. But this is DC Studios' second theatrical swing. This is the first real handoff after Superman. And the second movie in the new DCU, it is not tracking like an automatic event. It is tracking like a movie that still has to convince people why they need to show up. It's not fatal, But it is important because cinematic universes are built on momentum. And right now, the momentum, it's not obvious. There are people who looked at Superman opening to $125 million and immediately said, that's it, Gunn did it, the DCU is back. Well, I wasn't one of those. But nonetheless, that opening mattered. It was a good opening. It gave Warner Brothers a headline. It gave DC Studios something they badly needed after years of brand damage, reboot confusion, canceled projects, weird cameos, fan wars, and enough corporate restructuring to make a Warner Brothers org chart look like a crime scene. But one opening weekend does not rebuild trust, especially not with Superman. Superman is not a normal test case. He is the most famous superhero on Earth. He has 80 plus years of cultural weight behind him. People showed up because it was Superman, because it was a reboot, because James Gunn was involved, and because everyone wanted to know what this new DCU actually looked like. That is curiosity, and again, that is valuable. But curiosity is not the same thing as buy-in. A reboot is not proven when audiences show up for Superman. A reboot is proven when they show up for the next thing. And that's why Supergirl matters. This is the first theatrical transfer test. Did Superman build DCU momentum? Or did it simply borrow Superman's cultural weight for one weekend? Right now, the receipts say maybe the second one. Now let's talk about why this story is moving online, because right now, the movie is not the only product. The number is the product. The trade range is generally sitting in the mid 40s to mid 50s, but the number moving through the online conversation is lower because nobody clicks. Supergirl may open somewhere in a range depending on pre-sales, walk-ups, reviews, family competition, audience sentiment, and whether people feel like leaving the house during a Florida-level summer heat dome. Nobody shares that. Nobody puts that on a thumbnail unless they're trying to lose subscribers as performance art. People share the scary number. They share the downside number. They share the number that tells the story instantly. Because if the conversation becomes, Supergirl may not even hit 50, that's a problem. And if the conversation becomes, Supergirl might lose its opening weekend to Toy Story 5 Leftovers, that's a much bigger problem. Because now Supergirl does not just have to perform, it has to overperform. It has to beat tracking. It has to beat the meme. It has to beat the I told you so economy. And nobody monetizes I told you so quite like YouTube, except maybe Warner Brothers accounting departments. But that is a different horror franchise. There's also a prediction market angle here. Now, Polymarket is not Deadline. It's not Box Office Pro. It's not actual ticket sales. It's not a magical crystal ball that tells you what every family in Ohio is doing on Saturday afternoon. But it is useful as a sentiment receipt because people are putting money behind their expectations. And as of this recording, the Supergirl opening weekend market has moved heavily toward the movie opening under $52 million domestic. In fact, it's at 97%. The market's leading outcome is under 52 million. Not 48 to 64, not 64 to 70, not Supergirl shocks the world, under 52. That does not guarantee anything. Markets can be wrong. Traders can overcorrect. Online narratives can turn into feedback loops where everyone is reacting to everyone else reacting to the same number. But it still tells you where the expectations are. And right now, expectations are not being raised. They're being lowered. The question is not, how big can Supergirl get? The question is, can it even clear 52? That is not a hype train. That is a hostage negotiation with the spreadsheet. Now, to be fair, this is not a review video. I've not seen Supergirl yet, and the early reactions are not saying the movie is a disaster. Actually, a lot of the first reactions have been positive. But the interesting part is what people are comparing it to. Not just Superman, not just Guardians of the Galaxy. A lot of reaction conversation has been about Mad Max, grimy worlds, a rougher space adventure, a more rounded, messy, self-destructive Kara. And honestly, that might make for a better movie. A weirder, darker, stranger Supergirl movie could be more interesting than a safe corporate product engineered in a superhero content lab by 12 executives named Brandon. But there's a box office issue here. A good movie is not automatically an urgent movie. A strong reaction from critics or fan screening audiences does not automatically mean general audiences feel like they need to show up opening weekend. That is the missing ingredient: urgency. Superman had urgency because it was the launch of the new DCU. Supergirl has to create its own urgency. And right now, the early reaction story may be, this is better and weirder than people expected, but the tracking story is still, are enough people going to show up right now? That is the gap. Awareness is not urgency. Positive buzz is not turnout. And I hear it's good is not the same thing as I bought a ticket. And now we get to the worst part of the release corridor. Supergirl is not opening into any empty marketplace. She is opening behind Toy Story 5. And Toy Story 5 just opened to 160 million domestic and 312 million worldwide. That's the biggest domestic opening of 2026 so far. That is not a normal family movie opening. That is Disney and Pixar walking into the summer box office, dropping Woody and Buzz on the table and saying, remember when parents trusted our brand? Good news. We found the receipt. And here's the second weekend math. If Toy Story 5 drops just 60%, it still lands around 64 million. If it drops 65%, it still lands around 56 million. That means if Supergirl opens near the top of the range, maybe it wins. If it opens closer to the middle or low end, Pixar might beat it again. And if Toy Story 5 beats Supergirl in its second weekend, the headline is not Toy Story 5 holds well. The headline is James Gunn's second DCU movie lost to Woody and Buzz on leftovers. Now that is funny, but for Warner Brothers, it's also a problem because a soft opening can be spun. You can say the budget is lower. You can say the character is smaller. You can say it has legs. You can say it's not Superman. But a soft opening that loses to Toy Story 5's second weekend, that becomes a meme with a box office chart attached. And studios hate that. Not because memes are mean, because memes are efficient. They compress the whole problem into one sentence. She couldn't even win her own weekend, and that's why this matters. Now, to be clear, this does not mean Supergirl is bad. This does not mean audiences hate Millie Alcock. This does not mean James Gunn should be fired into the sun using one of those giant space cannons that only exist in Schneider fan comment sections. And it does not mean the DCU is dead. What it means is simpler. Superman may have created curiosity without creating an automatic franchise trust. That is the distinction. Superman had the reboot bump. It had James Gunn as the selling point. It had the new era of DC narrative. And most importantly, it had Superman. Supergirl has some of that momentum, but not all of it, because Supergirl is not Superman. That's not an insult. That's a box office reality. DC got people to sample Superman. That was the easy test. This is the harder one. Can DC get people to follow? Because if the answer is only at half the opening weekend, then the DCU has not built automatic audience trust. It has built conditional curiosity. And conditional curiosity is not a cinematic universe. It is a coupon. There is a Marvel comparison here, not because Supergirl is exactly the Marvels. Different studio, different character, different franchise moment. But the warning sign is similar. Captain Marvel opened to about 153 million domestic in 2019. Marvel was at peak altitude. The brand was strong. The road to Endgame was doing half the marketing. Then the Marvels opened years later to about 46 million domestic. That was not just a weak opening. That was a signal that goodwill did not automatically transfer. Audiences did not say, well, the first one made $1 billion, so obviously we're all going back. They said, no, actually, you need to earn this one too. That is the danger for Supergirl. Not that it becomes the Marvels overnight. The danger is that DC Studios assume Superman created universe-level buy-in when the receipts may show it only created Superman-level curiosity. And if that is true, every DCU movie now has to sell itself. Not just the universe, not just the logo, not just James Gunn saying the plan is strong. The movie itself has to create urgency. And right now, urgency is the question. So what does Supergirl need this weekend? Well, it needs 3 things. First, it needs to open closer to the top of the range. If it opens around 55 million or higher, Warner Brothers can work with that. They can say, this is not Superman, this is a different character, let's see the legs. Okay, fine. Second, it needs to beat Toy Story 5's second weekend, because if it doesn't, the entire narrative gets away from the studio. And once the narrative gets away, good luck stuffing it back into the PR envelope. Third, it needs legs. If Supergirl opens modestly but has strong audience scores, good word of mouth, and a clean second week hold, that changes the conversation. A movie can survive a modest opening if audiences keep showing up. But if it opens soft and then drops like a superhero movie with homework attached, the conversation changes fast. Then this is not just a smaller character issue, it is a franchise trust problem. And that is the phrase Warner Brothers does not want near this movie, because trust is what Superman was supposed to start rebuilding, and trust is not restored by one opening weekend. Trust is restored when audiences come back after the curiosity is gone. This weekend is the first real test of that. If Supergirl opens in the low to mid 40s, you already know what you'll hear. We are proud of this film. We are encouraged by audience response. This character has a long future in the DCU. We are focused on the full theatrical run. And then someone will say long tail, because apparently every studio press strategy is legally required to include one phrase that sounds like it came from a consulting deck written on airport Wi-Fi. What you will not hear is, maybe we moved too fast. Maybe Superman goodwill did not transfer. Maybe opening right behind Toy Story 5 was a scheduling crime. Maybe the DCU is not yet strong enough to make secondary characters automatic theatrical events. That is why we do this. Not because we hate movies, not because we want things to fail, but because studios are structurally incapable of honest public postmortems. Their job is to sell the next thing. Our job is to ask whether the story they are selling matches the receipts. And right now, the receipts say this weekend is more dangerous than the press tour wants to admit. Here's where I land. Supergirl, it might be good. I hope it is. I want to see good superhero movies. A good Supergirl movie would be good for DC, good for James Gunn, good for Warner Brothers, and good for audiences who are tired of every superhero conversation feeling like a custody battle between three fandoms in a spreadsheet. But box office is not graded on hope. It's graded on turnout. And if the second mainline DCU movie opens somewhere around 45 to 55 million after Superman opened to 125 million, that tells us something important. It tells us Superman worked as Superman. It does not yet tell us the DCU works as a universe. That is the distinction. And if Toy Story 5 beats Supergirl in its second weekend, that distinction becomes impossible to ignore. Because then this is not just a soft opening, it's a branding problem. The new DCU wants audiences to treat it like an event, but audiences may be treating it like optional homework. That is the danger. Not that Supergirl loses forever, not that DC is dead, not that James Gunn has to flee Warner Brothers dressed as Crypto in a trench coat. The danger is smaller and more annoying. The audience may be saying, "We checked out Superman, now sell us the next thing." That is what a trust ceiling looks like. And this weekend, Kara either breaks through it or the receipts do it for you. So I want to hear from you guys out there. What number does Supergirl need this weekend for you to call it a win? Is 55 million enough if the legs are strong? Does it need to beat Toy Story 5 outright? Or is the real problem that DC fans are already lowering expectations before the movie even opens? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you appreciate box office coverage that looks at the numbers instead of repeating studio optimism with better lighting, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video out there with your friends and family. We keep expectations low and the receipts high, and this weekend we find out whether Supergirl is the DCU's next step or its first real warning sign. I'm the Critical Nerd, and I am out.